Dinklage, Peter Dinklage, Peter Dinklage, Peter Dinklage, Dinklage, Peter Dinklage, Peter Dinklage, Peter Dinklage. Hello, interwebs. I hope you're all doing well, because I am here as your goddess of transgender tits and wine to give you some spicy thoughts about HBO Max's Game of Thrones prequel spinoff series, House of the Dragon. Yeah, the show is actually here, and it's had a few episodes released. It's like Winter or Sex with My Ex. You kept hearing about it coming, but never thought it actually would. Yet, here it is in all of its glory, and I love this show and find it endlessly fascinating, for very complex reasons. Despite House of the Dragon, on the surface, being a show about political maneuverings, backstabbings, dragons, and incest, Game of Thrones stuff, it's used that setting of Westeros that we all know and love to spark some thoughtful, prescient discussions around issues of sex, gender, patriarchy, women's bodily autonomy, and Matt Smith's ass. All equally important discussions in today's modern discourse. Look, let's just admit that we all wanted to see more of Matt Smith's ass ever since that one episode of Doctor Who with James Corden.
You spoke to the man upstairs?
Yeah.
What do you look like?
More normal than you do at the moment, mate. What are you doing?
But honestly, the show is by far one of my favorites on TV right now because, as y'all know, I'm a fantasy science fiction dork who loves to talk politics at the same time, so House of the Dragon is just like right in my wheelhouse. However, while the show has done a great job depicting and articulating these issues, in some ways, the series also feels at tension with itself. The show is textually about discussing patriarchal systems and the harm that they cause, yet as a spin-off of Game of Thrones, a show known for its gratuity in all things relating to sex and violence, House of the Dragon also uniquely revels in depictions of these harms as well. What's more, Hot D, which I think is the best abbreviation for any name ever, is about how these particular systems pressure everyone in them, from the men who benefit from the system to the women who are often passed around as objects within it, as well as how these systems place everyone, men and women included, into situations and expectations of behavior that ultimately harm everyone. The show also seems to wish to have us empathize at times less with the people who, both in its predecessor show Game of Thrones as well as fiction in general, have not had a voice in these highly patriarchal systems, but instead more empathize with the same voices that Game of Thrones itself focused on, namely the machinations of the men in power. As a result, it's a show at intriguing and nuanced tension with itself. Its narrative intent, the intent of the studio that makes it, the filmmaking language that the show evokes, and the protagonist it wants us to follow and understand, but sometimes, at certain critical moments, forgets to let us into the minds of and empathize with. So, gather round because I want to talk about House of the Dragon and how it frames its female and other marginalized characters in comparison with the men in the series, and discuss in a nuanced way that is more than simply saying men bad about what this means the show is saying and how it is saying it, and if it's getting across its intent clearly to the audience that watches it. Besides being the name of my weekly orgy, is a show that, from its initial inception, is seeping in nostalgia for its predecessor, Game of Thrones. Cut back to 2008, and Game of Thrones was the belle of the ball in Hollywood, coming off its penultimate season 7. It was breaking viewership records on HBO, it was a critical darling, and easily the most talked about water cooler show.
I am the king!
Turns out people love dragons and sex. Who knew? So, as Hollywood does when it smells a trend, everyone tried to get on the action and have their own next Game of Thrones. Netflix got The Witcher, Amazon got Wheel of Time and the appendices of the Lord of the Rings. Hell, we're even getting a Willow show from Disney+. Though I think we can all agree that the best one of all of them was the Dark Crystal Age of Resistance series that deserved a season 2, damn it. But HBO itself also wanted to keep in on the game of shows, because in Hollywood, you either win or you write off your properties for tax benefits, I guess. HBO commissioned 5 different series to be developed to spin out of Game of Thrones, the first of which was announced in June 2018, before the premiere of Game of Thrones' final season. This was to be a prequel set 10,000 years before Game of Thrones, in the Age of Heroes, setting up the origins of the White Walkers, and showing us the long alluded to Long Night, and more cool fantasy stuff nonsense. we all know we nerds lap that stuff up. It was a series that promised to be in the Game of Thrones universe, but still have its own unique flavor, its own vintage, as it were, as HBO figured that the Game of Thrones brand itself was strong enough that they could do something riskier with the story. Then, Game of Thrones final season came out, and it was messier than Tyrion in a brothel. Look, we were all there, we saw what happened, no need to dwell on it.
And I like to think my experience has led to some small skill in statecraft and an understanding.
Please sit.
Long and short, everyone seemed to sour on Game of Thrones, and the series' ending seemed to ruin the entire show's legacy. I mean, no matter how great those earlier seasons were, we all know where it's heading, to Bran on the throne. 'Cause who had a better story than Bran?
And who has a better story than Bran the Broken?
So, the entire basis for this dragon that Hollywood was going to be chasing had seemingly been murdered by those White Walkers themselves, D&D. But we all know Hollywood doesn't follow the critics, it follows the money. And the Bran of it all aside, that series finale made money. So the question became, could you squeeze more blood from that Game of Thrones stone? Or would another challenger win the game of shows? HBO had a strong brand, but no momentum to build upon it with. So, what do? Shortly after the series ended, HBO announced the development of House of the Dragon in September 2019, and the very next month, in October, stated that the Age of Heroes show, despite even having its pilot shot and being in post-production, was not going to move forward to series. This is because House of the Dragon was the series that George R.R. Martin himself had been backing, as it was the show most similar to Game of Thrones itself. And post the series ending, HBO needed to re-establish the Game of Thrones brand before it could do riskier products. Personally, I think I would have preferred the Age of Heroes show, but such is Hollywood. The entire future of Game of Thrones as a brand, with the potential Jon Snow spin-off, numerous other spin-offs in development, and 2 animated projects, were at risk. So HBO's whole thinking is to do the safe thing and remake Game of Thrones, or at least the next best thing, to see if any of those other projects were still worth pursuing. And while there are many great creative impulses in the House of the Dragon, there are still those cynical elements in the series' development that we can see in the series in surface-level ways. For example, the series takes place in Westeros in many of the same primary locations as Game of Thrones. The show uses much of the same iconic iconography, dragons, the Iron Throne, etc. The surface-level types of stories that the show tells, like its focus on medieval-style politicking, tournaments, knights, houses, and wars, and more, are all there. Yet these connections to Game of Thrones become even more overt when we discuss some of the actual ways that the show presents itself to us as the audience. For example, the theme song of the show is just the Game of Thrones theme song again, despite it tonally not meshing with any of the visuals on screen. This seems a bit too tonally dissonant, dissonant. And even beyond this, we still get things like the first episode of House of the Dragon having to name drop the Song of Ice and Fire.
Aegon called his dream the Song of Ice and Fire.
That's the thing that I know! Basically, scenes like that felt like the studio, not the creatives behind it, wanted us to do the Leonardo DiCaprio pointing meme at the screen.
Whoa. Here I come. Here I come.
Dream the Song of Ice and Fire.
But the similarities between Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon run even deeper than these surface-level details. I mean, even the showrunners of the series, at least in season 1, were creatives that were higher up in later seasons of Game of Thrones itself. And as a result of all of these reasons, I think this series' impulses aren't just rooted in these surface-level familiarities with Game of Thrones, but also in much deeper, more ingrained ways. Ingrained so much that they cut against the creative narrative intentions that House of the Dragon has. Because it's clear that the creatives behind the show have a narrative and thematic intent beyond simply regurgitating Game of Thrones. Namely, in who we're being asked to empathize and focus on with the show's story. House House of the Dragon is a series that sets its sight on a much more specific thematic target than Game of Thrones' sprawling geopolitical intentions. In contrast, House of the Dragon narrows in a little bit more, focusing solely on the upper class of Westeros' more European middle-class equivalent Seven Kingdoms to hone in on the issues inherent within such an extremely patriarchal and authoritarian society. These are themes and issues and topics that are undoubtedly present and discussed within Game of Thrones through characters like Dany, Cersei, Sansa, Marjorie Tyrell, and more, but House of the Dragon lasers in on it instead of it simply being part of a larger narrative tapestry that it was in Game of Thrones. And we can see this shift in thematic focus right from the very first episode of the series, where we learn in the show's prologue that following the death of his son, King Jaehaerys Targaryen, who was the ruler 200 years before the events of Game of Thrones, had to choose an heir between the male Viserys Targaryen and the female Rhaenys Targaryen, ultimately choosing the man Viserys. As the pilot continues by jumping forward several years into Viserys' reign, much of the episode itself is concerned with the question of Viserys' lineage, having at that point only a single daughter, Rhaenyra, leading many to assume that Viserys' brother Daemon is the heir apparent, given that he is a man, which many, Daemon included, believe supersedes Rhaenyra's claim given her womanhood.
The king's firstborn child.
Rhaenyra. A girl. No queen has ever sat the Iron Throne.
That is only by tradition and precedence, Lord
If order and stability so concerns this council, then perhaps we shouldn't break 100 years of it by naming a girl heir.
After the death of Viserys' wife and barely born main child, a scene which we'll be returning to later on, this question of heirship becomes top of mind, forcing Viserys to name an heir. Eventually, though, he chooses Rhaenyra due to Daemon's rampant violent tendencies and flagrant disrespect towards his brother, despite Viserys' continued conflicted affection for Daemon.
The truth is, Daemon should be far away from this court.
Daemon is my brother. My blood. And he will have his place at my court.
The rest of the series, at least so far in its first season, has focused on Rhaenyra's tenuous place in the ascendancy to the throne, given that she is a woman. Numerous characters pontificate about how Rhaenyra won't be accepted as a leader simply due to the fact that she is a woman.
It may be months or years, but he'll not live to be an old man. And if Rhaenyra succeeds him, war will follow, do you understand? The realm will not accept her.
And the growing tensions between houses grow as more seemingly valid options are laid at Viserys' doorstep. For example, Daemon proves a capable wartime leader, at least publicly. Viserys himself remarries to Rhaenyra's childhood friend Alicent Hightower, and has a son with her, leading many to assume the young Aegon will be made heir over Rhaenyra. As the series continues, these geopolitical tensions formed by patriarchal assumptions get complicated as well by individual machinations and perceived grievances because this is Westeros, and we're gonna Westeros it up. And I wish to be very upfront with the fact that I think the series does a fantastic job depicting the numerous ways patriarchal-style societies pressure both men and women into certain hierarchical places in the community, and also place specific pressures and expectations upon the behavior of both men and women that ultimately harm everyone. For example, Daemon is a man who has lived his whole life being told that he's supposed to be princely and give off strength. Yet, his place as both presumed but not stated heir apparent leaves him feeling emasculated, like he's not living up to the perceived strength he's supposed to convey. So, when he is given any level of power in this world, he wields it with public and heightened displays of violence in an attempt to showcase how strong he is, such as in the pilot when he takes his newly formed City Watch and doles out mass violent punishments on the criminals of King's Landing. It's all a display of public dominance. Yet, it's all papering over evident inner anxiety that he feels. Throughout the show, we see how he reacts violently like a child whenever his manliness is assaulted. When Viserys sends ships to help Daemon in a losing war, Daemon has a violent tantrum, then does a literal suicide run to kill his enemy simply to prove that he's capable by himself without his brother intervening. Also, at numerous times in the series, whenever Daemon tries to have a power grab, Rhaenyra shows up and basically says, "Do it, man up, see if you can do it," and Daemon always backs down.
If you wish to be restored as heir, you'll need to kill me. So do it. And be done with all this bother.
It all showcases how while Daemon likes to exude this strength and power, he really is ultimately kind of a soft boy. And it showcases how Daemon's expectations placed upon him in a patriarchal society have their toll on him individually. Yet, given the amount of power that same patriarchal and authoritarian society gives him as both a royal and as a man, we see how much harm he's able to do as a result of his feeling emasculated. For example, he castrates people and beats those up around him. Hell, he even kills his wife due to his feeling forced to be in a relationship with her. And it's no accident that scene where he murders her highlights that he decides to kill her right after she makes a joke questioning his sexual prowess as a man.
I knew you couldn't finish. Craven!
It highlights how Daemon, due to his power as a man in this world, is capable of lashing out in his moments of anger, doling out the harm that disproportionately affects women, poor people, and those with less power than him around him. And the show does a fantastic job of allowing us to both empathize with Daemon and also showcase how he is extremely harmful and how he's allowed to get away with it because of his place in this society. And the series really wrestles with the complexities present within his character. However, when we're talking about a series that focuses in on a patriarchal society, the people that one would expect to receive the most focus is the women in this society. And House of the Dragon does spend a lot of time also focusing on how the women, specifically our main character Rhaenyra and her friend Alicent Hightower, are often seen as less of a person, but more objects within this society because they are women, and how that depersoning comes into conflict with the power that these women are given to wield given their station in society. The most obvious example of this is how Rhaenyra is often dismissed regarding her claim to the throne as a woman. But we can even see it in much simpler ways as well, like how her ideas are simply discarded by the men she vocalizes her thoughts to. In one scene in episode 2, Rhaenyra offers advice to the High Council on how she thinks they should handle her uncle's stealing of a dragon egg and him making a clear challenge to Viserys' rule, advice which everyone in the council dismisses.
It isn't that simple, Rhaenyra.
It would be a show of force.
At least the princess has a plan.
I only meant that we should at least...
Perhaps there's some better use for the princess's talents, Your Grace.
Yet, when later in that episode Rhaenyra takes matters into her own hands and confronts Daemon as she suggested, she proves to have been correct in her assessment, and been even more successful than the men around her, such as Otto Hightower, the Hand of the King. It was Rhaenyra's show of power that managed to get Daemon to back down. Yet no one up until that moment thought that Rhaenyra's idea was sound, or that she could actually wield the power that she suggested using because she was a woman. Yet beyond how Rhaenyra is dismissed, the show also highlights women's roles as props in men's games in this world. In the pilot, for example, Alicent Hightower is sent to comfort the king by her father, and it's made clear that Otto is using Alicent as a manipulation piece upon the king, as he asks Alicent to appear more womanly and thereby sexualized and adult by wearing Alicent's mother's clothing in order to go see Viserys.
I wouldn't know what to say.
It's not that. He'll be glad of a visitor. You might wear one of your mother's dresses.
And Otto's manipulation works, as the king eventually chooses Alicent as his wife despite there being a better political match for him elsewhere, all stemming from Otto's manipulations in order to gain more influence upon the crown and make it so that his house would be the ones to produce possible heirs to Viserys. Alicent, for Otto, was not his daughter at that moment, but an object and tool for him to use in order to gain power. On top of this, we also see how women's desires and needs and wants are often suppressed, ignored, or manipulated. In an excellent sequence in episode 4, we are given juxtaposing scenes of Alicent having sex with Viserys and Rhaenyra having sex with her uncle Daemon in a brothel. Alicent is called to the king's room late in the night to have sex with him against her own wishes, but she's given no real choice because, again, she is a woman.
Pardon me, Your Grace. The king has requested your presence. The hour is quite late. Yes, Your Grace.
We see Viserys fuck her while she takes no joy in it. At the same time, though, this scene is cut to shots of Rhaenyra seeming to enjoy having sex, reveling in the idea that sex can be pleasurable, something she's realizing for the first time in her young life, a kind of sexual awakening for her.
Fucking is a pleasure, you see.
Yet, even then, Daemon is manipulating her, attempting to have sex with her in public to make her seem defiled by him. So we can see, even in moments where she takes ownership of her sexual desire for the first time, Rhaenyra is still just as objectified as Alicent is, though Daemon cannot go all the way with her, tying into his own emasculization storyline. And we're also setting aside the complicated topic of incest within all that, which is its own whole discussion. Further, the show continually has moments highlighting the tensions women are constantly placed into between their power and their womanhood, such as in episode 3, where Rhaenyra has to deal with her being considered as a potential political wedding match to the men in the kingdom, a choice initially being considered without her knowledge, and which would have implications for her power, as any man she marries might gain more weight in power as a male king.
You have them in hand now. You have no further use for me. You might as well peddle me for what you can. A mountain stronghold or a fleet of ships.
You have misjudged me, Rhaenyra.
Oh, know it. Jason Lannister knows it. You said it yourself. The lords of the realm gather like vultures to a carcass, hoping to feast on my bones.
She takes issue with this lack of choice as a woman and the expectations that she has to marry for political reasons, not love. And we see how her father continually pushes upon her the importance of her duty as a leader to get married, and is sympathetic towards.
And I have tried often to discuss it with you, but you've refused me at every turn.
That is because I do not wish to get married.
Even I do not exist above tradition and duty, Rhaenyra.
Excuse me, Your Grace.
But he also constantly ignores and dismisses how Rhaenyra's womanhood makes these power dynamics much more problematic for her than it would for him marrying a woman. We see this even in small ways, such as how in episode 5, Viserys talks about how Rhaenyra was violated and ruined by Daemon by his potentially having sex with her, but ignores how he and Daemon did much the same as men before they were married, having sex in many a brothel before then.
What does it matter, brother? When we were Rhaenyra's age, we fucked our way through most of the brothels on the Street of Silk.
We were young men. She is just a girl.
However, Rhaenyra isn't given this same leniency as they were because she is a woman, where her value, at least at this point before she's wedded, is in how virginal she is, rather than in her personhood, contrasting to how men are seen as full people no matter how much sex they have. Further, the show also frames how even times when men defend women can sometimes come from personal affection or patriarchal desires rather than a true earnest want to upend the patriarchy. For example, in an interview, the showrunner described how the reason Viserys defends Rhaenyra's claim to the throne is not that he sees her as more deserving of the throne or that he wishes to say screw you to this patriarchal system, but instead because he feels terrible that he killed his wife in the pilot and sees his defending Rhaenyra's claims as honoring her.
He realizes that his quest for a boy ended up killing her, and he feels horrible about it, and this is his way of making it up to her. Like, I should have realized, like, you gave me Rhaenyra, and he says in episode 1, Rhaenyra is that you are the best of your mother, and she is Emma's daughter. She's Emma's child. She's the only thing he has left of Emma. So he is going to make her heir, and he is never going to change his mind because he is never going to stop loving Emma. So I think this putting Rhaenyra as his heir is his penance for what happened.
Wow.
And his declaration of love to his wife. And he's never going to change his mind because that would be betraying Emma and what she went through.
This showcases how men sometimes still fall into this idea of needing to defend the woman out of one's own desire to assert manhood or replace honor, rather than for the woman's sake itself. And it's also Viserys not recognizing that this desire comes at the cost of a woman's life in the first place, and placing that woman's life as a secondary concern to his own feeling of being upset that he killed her. All of this, the tenuous place that women are placed into and how they're objectified and how they're wielded and used and ignored and diminished, is well articulated and depicted by the show. So why do I still have nuanced criticisms and critiques of House of the Dragon? Well, this brings us back to how I think House of the Dragon mirrors its predecessor, Game of Thrones, in both writing and filming style, and how that ultimately creates tension with the ideas House of the Dragon wishes to convey explicitly. The writing of both Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon are shows that do a fantastic job of understating a character's interior life, leaving much room for interpretation through their actions. In books, readers get certain insights into what a character thinks or feels during certain specific moments in the narrative. We get internal dialogues or narratives which let us know what a character feels, even if they don't display that feeling externally to everyone around them in the story. Yet, TV and film, unless we have a literal voiceover or narrator, doesn't give us that same opportunity to hear a character's internal thoughts as quickly. All we can do as watchers to register how they feel is interpret both their actions that were shown by the character as well as the actor's interpretations that they visualize externally to us. What a character's face shows to us allows us to interpret what that character thinks and feels, in a way that a book is able to just state to us. However, many TV shows tend to hypercompensate for this perceived failing by having characters verbalize or state what they're feeling at certain moments in the narrative, whether it's talking to a trusted friend or a therapist or literally narrating certain scenes. That's how we're able to get a little bit inside a character's head. However, in order to show us and not tell us, a TV show will sometimes use a more nuanced or visual way to showcase a character's internal struggle, such as them seeing visions or speaking to personifications of people who died or aren't there actually in the scene, representing a character's internal dialogue and struggle. However, both Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon leave much more room for interpretation about their characters' motives and intentions, as, due to the lack of trust many characters have in those around them, most of the people here in Westeros don't verbalize their internal feelings, as well as the fact that House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones are played much more naturalistically, not using the more stylistic tools to visualize a character's internal struggle, which then leaves a lot of how they act and think open to us as audiences to interpret. Half of the joy of a show is listening to podcasts of people talking about why they think a certain character made a certain choice at a certain time in the show. This means that each action or moment where we see an actor display emotions to us becomes critically important for how we are supposed to understand them and ultimately how we empathize with them. And the amount of time that we spend with each individual character will also help clue us in to how we should be feeling about them. On top of this, the visual language of the show, such as where a camera focuses on or where it is placed in a scene, the cinematography in general as it were, is also an important tool the filmmakers have to place us into a scene or sequence both physically but emotionally in relation to characters, and how we're supposed to relate to them. And Game of Thrones often did this very well as a series, casting fantastic actors to portray these characters and giving us wonderful scenes to sort of see and glimpse into what these characters were thinking and feeling. But one place that the show continually struggled with in showing us what a certain type of character was feeling and allow us to interpret their interior feelings as characters was with women, as well as other people outside of the straight men that the series normally focused upon, something that is continued into House of the Dragon. Let me give you a clear-cut example of this and how I think the show fails to empathize and wrestle with those who are most likely to face harm in a highly patriarchal society like Westeros, and how that creates tensions with the show's intended themes. And because I'm gay and like making it all about me, let's talk about the queers in House of the Dragon. In episode 5, we are introduced properly to the character of Lenore Valerian. I say properly introduced because he was technically in episode 3 in like the background of one scene and a few blink and you'll miss it shots of him riding a dragon that was honestly confusing because I wasn't sure who the hell this was supposed to be until I looked it up afterwards. So we really get to meet him in episode 5, where he is engaged to be wedded to Rhaenyra as part of a political olive branch between Rhaenyra's family and his own. And it's important to note what gets highlighted about him as a character as we get to know him. For all of the other characters in the series up until this point, many of the scenes that we get with them highlight different and essential characteristics about them. For example, the first High Council scene in the show gives us a good example of how to introduce numerous characters. The Master of Coin talks about money, the Shipmaster Lord Corlys talks about ships, Hightower as Hand of the King worries about succession. And then, successive scenes after this moment highlight other aspects of these characters, like Otto Hightower being a manipulative bastard. Each scene adds something to the tapestry of who this character is. However, in contrast, the only characteristic about Lenore that gets highlighted through the scenes in episode 5 with increasing unsubtlety with each scene is the fact that he's gay.
That's what he said, right, guys, because of gay?
In the first scene, his gayness is the main characteristic discussed, using duck and goose meal metaphors as Rhaenyra makes a deal about how they can marry but still enjoy sex outside of their marriage.
I prefer roast duck to goose. I cannot say why.
It's not for a lack of trying.
In the second scene where we get to feature him, his parents discuss his gayness without stating it, calling it a phase that he'll grow out of.
I'm sure Lena was already taken with her. She's grown quite comely these last few years.
You know his true nature.
He's still young. He will outgrow it. There is no pleasure in the world like bedding a woman.
Then, in the third scene with this character, we get beat over the head with the fact that he's gay because he's making out with his lover in a field that all gays apparently go to make out sexually in.
You'll need a sworn protector.
So the main characteristic of Lenore, and incidentally his lover character, the Knight of Flowers, that gets repeatedly overemphasized with each successive scene, in case you missed it with the subtlety going on there, is the fact that he's gay. The show really wants you to know that he's gay.
Don't stomp your little last season Prada shoes at me, honey.
Not last season.
That fact is emphasized more than the fact that this guy rides a fucking dragon. Apparently, we need to know what else he's riding. This brings us to the pre-wedding celebration scene later on in that same episodes. Weddings always go well in Westeros. As it's his own wedding, Lenore is of course in attendance, but we also have Sir Cole in this scene, who we have been given several scenes in this same episode fleshing out his current interior struggle. How he views himself as honorless due to his having broken his Kingsguard vows by sleeping with Rhaenyra in the previous episode, meaning he is dealing with his own internalized struggle with his masculine sense of honor that he and those around him expect to live up to, but he failed to live up to. Each scene in the episode with Cole highlights this interior struggle and evolves it in different ways. He first tries to convince Rhaenyra to leave with him, giving up her power, title, and expectations for him so that he can regain his honor, ignoring her own wants and desires.
It began with you as my sworn protector, my white knight.
I took an oath. As a knight of your Kingsguard. An oath of chastity. I've broken it. I've soiled my white cloak. It is the only thing I have to my fucking name. I thought if we were married, I might be able to restore it.
The Iron Throne looms larger than me, larger than anyone in my family.
Then, after she turns him down, we see Cole coming forward to Alicent and telling her what happened, expecting to be killed for his vow breaking, hoping that at least this will get him back some shred of honor, something that Alicent decides not to do.
My oath has been broken. I have dishonored myself. I deserve no consideration. But if, as a clement queen, you are inclined to pity, I would ask only this. That rather than gelding me and having me tortured, you would sentence me mercifully to death.
Meaning, by the time that we reach this wedding scene, we, as the audience, have been given a lot to know what is going on with Cole internally in this moment. He's really struggling with this fact that he believes his honor has been ruined and violated, and he has no way to regain it. He's tried literally everything he could to gain it back, and sees no way out. Then contrast this, where we get a scene with Lenore and his lover, but here we see him being the stereotypical chatty gay at the party, who likes to talk about who's fucking who.
I know who it is. The handsome paramour.
Who?
Sir Criston Cole.
A sworn protector.
Look at him. The man is fully struck.
To be fair, that is what queers do. This is how we talk at parties. But then from there, the Knight of Flowers goes up to Cole to drop that he is gay and reveal that he is Lenore's lover to this man who he has never met and only assumes is fucking Rhaenyra.
Sir Laenor is quite dear to me. As I know, the princess is to you. We should swear to each other to guard them and their secrets. Because if those are kept safe, then so are we all.
This is incredibly questionable as a choice. I mean, what if he was wrong? I get it. A queer person's sex dar is a powerful thing, but in this world that looks down upon gay men, that's a dangerous move. Even further, because we haven't been giving many scenes with the Knight of Flowers up to this point, we don't really understand his intentions here. Is he trying to threaten Cole? Make him his comrade? Relate to him? Or protect himself with and from Cole? I don't really know him well enough to understand because we haven't given enough chances to see a lot of who this character is beyond the fact that he's a chatty, sassy gay. And as a result, this sequence comes across as really forced, something that the writers had this character do in order to get us to do the next scene, something that is going to reinforce Cole's arc, not the gay man's. Because this causes Cole to lash out violently a few moments later, literally bashing in the knight's head, which we see in gruesome detail. There are a lot of things to talk about with this scene. First off, most importantly, it falls into the bury your gays trope, a trope that constantly comes up in media where LGBTQ characters are more likely to die than their queer counterparts. The issue with the bury your gays trope is not that queer folks shouldn't or can't be killed in stories. The problem is that this more often happens to gay characters, meaning that queer folks like myself watching shows are more likely to be identifying into a character who experiences death or trauma. This is very much true in House of the Dragon, as the only two explicitly gay characters are now either dead or defined by grief. Further, this trope highlights how gay folks are often used as props in the stories of straight characters, not as characters in themselves. And again, this is true in Hot D, as these gay men are there to motivate Rhaenyra's and specifically Cole's storylines, not to be characters in and of themselves. Again, this isn't an inherent problem within the show. It's fine to have gay characters be on the peripheral of other people's stories and not the center of one's, but it's an issue of its ubiquitousness within media. And even further, we can see how problematic this becomes by how just limited these characters are. They are just gay men. They don't have anything else going on, when many other characters in the show have a lot of other things happening. They have full lives, whereas these guys apparently just fuck a lot. But this becomes even more problematic because House of the Dragon is a show about how those who don't fit certain expectations of patriarchal society and how it objectifies and pushes down those people. Yet the show itself is objectifying and using long-used problematic tropes around marginalized people without critical awareness of how that might be counterintuitive to the themes of the show. Again, this isn't to say that the show has to comment on these tropes, but if the show is about how patriarchal worlds harm certain people, but then uses the same storytelling tropes that marginalized people in our real-world society face, then the show somewhat failed to be self-aware about how the story tropes that it's using is intersecting with the show's own themes. It's not only offensive to me as a queer person, but it's also just a huge missed opportunity by the show itself. But there's something even deeper that we can talk about here, because we can see where the show implicitly places us within the scene and how that also de-emphasizes us connecting with these gay men. After the murder of the Knight of Flowers, the camera shows us one shot of Lenore close up before he realizes that his lover is dead. So we don't get to see his grief directly in front on camera. After this shot, however, once Lenore begins to wail in grief on the ground, the camera cuts away to a distant shot, as if we are standing in the crowd watching Lenore from behind at a distance. He's distant to us, far away, something to look at, not be a part of. Yet this creates tension with us as human beings with empathy, especially for me as a queer person. This is a complicated concept to get across to many folks who don't analyze media in this way, or are used to having a film mostly mirror where they would expect to be standing within a scene like this. Many straight men in a situation like the one depicted in this sequence would expect to be standing in the same place the camera is placed in the scene, away at a distance looking at Lenore. But me, as a queer person watching the show, where I see myself in the scene, is next to Lenore or Lenore himself. I'm emotionally there with him. Yet the camera is pulled back, and as such, I personally notice that I'm being asked to take a viewpoint that I don't have. And this is perfectly fine. That's the point of film, to direct our perspectives in ways that we wouldn't naturally have ourselves. But when it does that, you have to ask yourself why the filmmakers chose this viewpoint over another one. What is this perspective giving me versus if they had chosen to give a close-up shot of Lenore grieving instead, where we would clearly see and feel his grief? Having the camera stand here in the distance makes us feel Lenore as distant, and has us look upon him voyeuristically, looking from above with sadness, yet pity. This is emphasized by the fact that we get a reaction shot of Viserys here, as if this viewpoint of us standing in the crowd is his own. And as a result, we're meant to sort of take on the feelings that Viserys feels here. And we see him as sad, but more exasperated and even relieved that it wasn't Rhaenyra who was dead. It's a detached feeling, and it's important to note that we are being made to empathize with the strongest man politically in the room. He even begins to bleed from the nose in the scene, and we see his pain at that moment, giving us as the audience more chance to empathize with Viserys' failing health rather than the dead gay man or his grieving lover that is in that very same room. Yet after this sequence, we are given a scene where we follow Cole, where he almost dies by suicide due to his feelings over his actions, meaning we are told to empathize with him after this moment in an intensely dark moment. We only see Lenore, and also Rhaenyra, in a brief scene, mostly shot from a distance, where they are being used as political props and quickly married. Now, I want to be very clear here. It's not a bad thing that we get to understand and see Cole here. I mean, he becomes a little petty bitch in episode 6, but that's actually interesting. We get to see his internal conflict that motivated his attack, and we get to understand what that means for him after the fact. It's not a bad character to follow. What I am saying, though, is that in these scenes, the emphasis is placed upon these straight male characters' feelings and perspectives. We are made to understand them in the scene, take on their viewpoints, empathize with them, given numerous scenes both before and after this scene to see how they feel about things. Yet at the same time, the gay characters are just there to be gay and then die as props for other characters. This problem is highlighted even further to me by the fact that, in an interview, the male showrunners seem to not even be really aware of the issues around or even the trope of bury your gays itself.
I was probably vaguely aware of the bury your gays trope. I mean, I try not to read the internet. I live in my own storytelling world, so I'm not affected by those things, so I feel free to tell the story. But look, there are lots of interesting characters in the show. People come in and come out of this world all the time.
It's one thing to not be aware of a trope but feel you need to use it to tell a story you wish to tell. And I would be willing to at least hear an argument by the showrunner that would at least sway me into understanding why they chose to do a bury your gay storyline if they felt it was the best choice for their overall story. But if you're going to do that, you should do it as the best version of that trope that you possibly could, which was definitely not the case here. And it frustrates me most by the fact that this showrunner seemingly wasn't even aware of the trope in the first place, which underscores to me the lack of viewpoints in the writer's room when it comes to depicting marginalized folks, which seems to me to be an abject failure of the series if the show wishes to be about how these systems fail many people, as both showrunners themselves have talked about in interviews.
In making a show that has historically been from a male perspective and wanting to shift and listen, I'm a guy, I'm not a woman, so I can only do what I can do. And I know, I understand my limitations, but I
appreciate you saying that.
But just because I'm a guy doesn't mean that I can't be interested and want to be part of trying to get something out there that feels like it's not getting out there as much as it should at this point in the evolution of our society.
Absolutely.
It's this constant refrain, and I'll just say a little bit of arrogance we see from male showrunners, that they feel they can and should write other perspectives of other people and can do so from a place of authority and understanding, feeling that they can intrinsically empathize with us, which I'm not arguing that they can't, but if you're going to do that, you actually have to do the work to research and listen to the communities that you wish to portray, not just assume that you can do so without any research. If you want to write about marginalized people, you should do the work to include those voices in the creation of your product, or at the very least do the basic level of understanding and research so you can at least learn about one of the most common of problematic portrayals and tropes about that community in media, or else your story is going to lean lazily into those same tropes and simplistic portrayals, as we clearly see with the two gay characters in House of the Dragon. I mean, it's saddening because the show could have delved further into what being a gay man in this patriarchal world could have meant. What is being queer like in this world of House of the Dragon? The world is hyper-religious in a way that mirrors European religious views around sex in the Middle Ages, so how do gay men operate within that? Also, gay men are somewhat protected if they're in the upper class, as those with power can make people look the other way and ignore many things. So many questions that House of the Dragon fails to engage with. Again, I'm not arguing that the show has to engage with these questions. I mean, as people will love to tell me in the comments, not every show has to be all about you. What I am arguing is that the portrayals that they give of gay people in the show are lazy and reductive, and if they had actually done the work, they could have used queerness instead to bolster their concepts, not limit them, and also allow queer people like myself to also feel included in the narrative. But instead, the showrunners, through either direct bias or just not thinking about it, don't wish us to identify with the gays, reinforcing subtly a heterosexual and hypermasculine perspective that cuts against what this show is supposed to be about. I know that there may be some people who watch this video and think that I'm just arguing for the show to say straight men bad or that the show is horrible. But I'm not trying to argue in such a binary way. My argument is not to say that men are evil, or that I want the show to argue in such reductive terms. I don't want them to make it seem like Cole was this, just simply evil dude. I like the complexity that his character has. Nor am I saying that I think the show is saying that Cole's actions or other men's harm caused throughout the show are correct. Depiction of something does not equal endorsement. Yet, what I want to point out is a more nuanced discussion of asking who is this show's assumed audience to be, and who is writing it, and whose eyes is the show asking us to enter this world through, thus asking us to empathize most with, and how does that affect how we are meant to engage with the story's themes. The show is textually about patriarchy and the harm it causes, yet it many times fails to have us empathize and understand those who are most clearly harmed by such systems, like women or LGBTQ folks. And I think a lot of this is due to the fact that the House of the Dragon is being created by people from the original Game of Thrones show who are trying their best to move beyond the perceived failures of that show and say something new and give new voices and perspectives, but not actually reckoning with what that means to make a show like that, nor the issues inherent in how Game of Thrones was written as a show, given that they're being asked to draw upon nostalgia for that show and having to uphold this series as basically a Game of Thrones 2. Let's take a look at how House of the Dragon carries forward a lot of the issues that were present in Game of Thrones in terms of the viewpoints that it portrays, in a way that runs counter to the themes that House of the Dragon wishes to focus on. First and foremost, since we were just talking about it, Game of Thrones also had repeated problems with depicting queerness in the show. Many of the gay characters like Loras Tyrell, Oberyn Martell, and Renly Baratheon also fell quickly to the bury your gays trope. Further, we were never supposed to really identify with them as characters. Despite Renly being an intriguing character, the show instead focused in on the hypermasculine and straight Stannis' claim to the throne instead.
No one wants you for their king. You never wanted any friends, brother. But a man without friends is a man without power.
For the sake of the mother who bore us, I will give you this one night to reconsider.
The amazing Pedro Pascal's Oberyn Martell, who is quite literally one of my favorite characters in media ever, also fell to the bury your gays trope, yet his sexuality on top of that was also exoticized as foreign. Yet, to a degree, these were better portrayals of queerness than even House of the Dragon, given much more depth, which feels sad considering House of the Dragon's intended themes. Yet, let's move on to another way that Game of Thrones issues are perpetuated in House of the Dragon. There have been numerous discussions, both when the show was on the air and after the fact, about how Game of Thrones often failed to allow us to empathize with women characters at crucial, critical moments. But I'll pick one that got a lot of controversy to highlight what I'm talking about here. In the 4th season of Game of Thrones, Cersei is with her lover and brother Jaime, hanging out over their dead son's body. It's Game of Thrones, what do you expect? In a moment of grief over the loss of their son, they both embrace and then kiss. But then after that moment, Cersei pushes Jaime away. It appears then that Jaime forces himself upon her as she repeatedly tells him to stop, making this scene a depiction of sexual assault.
Jaime, no, babe, please.
No.
Stop it!
Now, there is a lot of non-consensual sex in Game of Thrones, and often it makes sense for the story. But the controversy here with Game of Thrones is that, in the book, this same exact scene wasn't sexual assault. In the book version of this scene, Cersei says explicitly yes to Jaime's advances. It seemed like the showrunners were trying to just put in more added sexual assault that wasn't present in the books in order to be provocative, in order to drum up controversy and attention for the show. Yet, it actually turns out that the show intended the scene to be viewed as consensual. As the episode director stated,
it becomes consensual by the end, because anything for them ultimately results in a turn-on, especially a power struggle.
And this led to some interesting problems, especially because the show had taught us as the audience to interpret these scenes. I remember around that time that episode aired, I saw many people who watched the show, including my own brother, say, oh yeah, they got that this scene was consensual because you could just tell by how Cersei was physically reacting to Jaime, which is, deeply problematic, because what the show is actually showing us is a woman saying no. And when a woman says no in real life, it means no. Yet this is a boundary, in fact, that many people in our society today tend to ignore, saying a woman was really asking for it, or she didn't really know what she wants, or you had to push a little bit harder just to make her say yes. The pursuit of a yes, despite the fact that a woman explicitly stated her boundaries. And so the fact that the show thought having Cersei react physically as if she was enjoying the sex was enough to depict that the scene is okay is a major problem, as it mirrors many male-centric views on women's bodies in our world about how women must implicitly want sex if they seem to physically enjoy it, no matter how much we might state otherwise. And this isn't the only scene in the show where a woman having sex was turned into something less clearly delineated than it was in the book, such as Dany and Drogo's sex scene in the series pilot, which was consensual in the book, though we could discuss the age gap in the book as well as its own kind of discussion and complication in there, but the show took that same scene and made it very clear that it was an assault. And those are just kind of the most egregious and obvious examples. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying that Game of Thrones was always bad and terrible at depicting good female characters. There are many great women characters in there. We stand Brienne of Tarth here.
He was slower than I expected. And more predictable.
I've been sitting in a muddy pen, wrapped in chains for the past year.
And I'm a woman. I was still beating you.
The issue is more that the show had a more consistent problem when it came to depicting women, given how the male showrunners and the directors of the series often failed to think about how the woman's interior life needed to be reflected in a way that was distinctive from a man's point of view, and as a result leading into many unconscious biases that these male showrunners probably had. Now, this isn't again to say that men are bad and should be always shown to be bad or blah 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 blah, but more just to say that these male showrunners wouldn't take into account how certain biases in the way that they were writing certain characters or thinking about certain themes or ideas might influence how their audience might view and understand the women within the series, especially given that the series itself was so interpretable. And this is unfortunately a problem that carries over into House of the Dragon, at least in certain instances. Despite the show being about Rhaenyra, we aren't really given as many moments where the show reflects upon the power dynamics and interior life of women. For example, in episode 4, Rhaenyra sleeps with her knight, Sir Criston Cole. In interviews, the actor who played Cole discussed how he worked with the series writers and directors to make sure that they got the love sequence right. But it seems from the way that he discusses it that the scene was more conceptualized in terms of depicting the physical realism of the scene, such as getting his armor off in a way that we haven't seen in other TV shows when we have sex with our knightly dudes. But as a result, as my friend Princess Weeks put it, the scene comes off more as forbidden romance between equals rather than it really reconciling with the power dynamics that are at play in the scene. And you can kind of hear that vibe in how the actor discusses it.
And Claire, our director, was amazing, and we sort of, I remember it was just off the back, Normal People had just come out and they had done sex scenes so brilliantly in that show, and we were going like, God, wouldn't it be cool if there was an element of like it feeling genuinely how it is in a world that is, you know, so well known for sort of not so much humanity in the sex scenes particularly. And, you know, I think Millie feels similarly, at least, that we really wanted to make it feel like it was a couple of kids trying to figure out how to do this thing.
Who genuinely like each other and are excited to be with each other.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 100%.
But as a result of this, the power dynamics that are present in the show aren't thought of in the depiction of the scene, at least not in a way that we, as an audience, can see on screen with any intention. Yet there are so many issues to contend with when we talk about the complicated power dynamics present here. On the surface, Cole is a grown man, and Rhaenyra is, I believe, still 18 in the scene, just coming into her own sexual identity, as we saw earlier in the episode. On top of that, we already spoke about earlier how much of Rhaenyra's worth as a woman in this world is tied up in her virginity, something Cole would be taking and could have the power to divulge if he wanted to, thus giving him some sort of power over her. But also, conversely at the same time, Rhaenyra is his princess, and the person that Cole is sworn to protect. Cole is placed in a precarious situation by Rhaenyra, because if he says no to her advances, it is technically treason, which is punishable by death. But even if it wasn't treason, if he said no to her, it would ruin the trust and relationship with the person that he's sworn to protect. But at the same time, if he says yes, Then he's having sex and breaking his vows as a Knight's Guard, ruining his honor that he held so much to his name. Yet, much of that complexity with the power dynamics isn't really on display when we talk about the scene. However, I think the show fails a lot more when we get to discuss women outside of Rhaenyra. The show's writers stated in interviews before the series that they would have less gratuitous sex scenes, and that is mostly true. The sex and violence in the show are somewhat more intentional when displayed than just there as they were in Game of Thrones. But there is still a lot of sex and violence. And when those scenes happen, the show still revels in depicting them, showing a lot of gore, violence, and boobies, such as with the horrific C-section scene in the show's pilot episode. On the one hand, this scene does have a lot of intentionality to it. It's an excellent scene to show how Viserys, as the king and a man who chose to have the C-section that would kill his wife in childbirth without gaining his wife's consent about her own body, has greater autonomy over a woman's body than the woman herself does, especially in childbearing that we're dealing with in the United States and around the world today. However, at the same time, the scene's visuals also linger upon the event's agony, pain, and blood. At the same time, the episode's also intercutting it with scenes of knighthood violence, depicting how this C-section scene is yet another element of male violence being enacted upon women. Yet, and how this scene is shot and edited, the woman is still objectified, even segmented by the camera in these moments. We just get to see body parts for our viewing pleasure rather than seeing her as a whole person, instead of Viserys, who we get to see in profile throughout the entire scene, seeing his reaction to the horrific violence being done to his wife on his own order. Yet we could even discuss this scene further, because listening to an interview with one of these showrunners, one of the reasons that they juxtaposed this birthing scene with the Knights Tournament was to highlight, in his own words, how women's battlefield was the birthing bed.
We needed to find a parallel, and it seemed fairly obvious that women give birth. They can do that, men can't, right? So it's part of the cycle of life. And so in theory, this is going to happen to every woman in this story, which means they are going to be in danger. It's probably not dissimilar to a man at some point being in a dangerous situation where they have to fight for their lives in that era. I'm hugely generalizing here, but I'm just trying to kind of find the parallel. And then it became the thing of, okay, and then how are we making the world a better place if we show births? What are we bringing to the table? And that's, I think, where both the parallel from the female perspective that it is the battleground came about, but also the thematics of we need each birth to be different, because if they're the same thing, then that's all we're doing is repeating ourselves. The first one's interesting, everything else becomes boring.
To a degree, I get the idea of what this scene is juxtaposing, that they wish to display men's and women's places within this Westerosian world. Yet this intention somewhat essentializes women in this way. In Game of Thrones, while we did get to see many stories of women struggling to be seen as just as worthy as men around them, there were still many strong women within the series, and many that didn't fit into the simple molds of where women were supposed to be placed. Again, we stand Brienne of Tarth here. Yet in House of the Dragon, we don't really have those characters. Pretty much every woman in the show is a mother, or expected to be a mother, and even die and suffer around motherhood. As a result, it highlights women simply as fighting to be seen as worthy only within the purview of where women are supposed to be situated in this world. We don't get to see a Arya or Brienne of Tarth in this series, women who don't fit into the mold for women, even if they have to struggle to be perceived that way. And there certainly would have been women around this time who would not have fit into these very rigid roles for women. It ultimately feels like a backpedal in terms of some of the depiction of women when compared to Game of Thrones.
So you're a highborn then, you're a lady?
No, I mean, yes. My mother was a lady, and my sister,
but you were a lord's daughter and you lived in a castle and But all that about cocks, I should never have said. And I've been pissing in front of you and everything. I should be calling you milady.
Do not call me milady.
As milady commands. Well, that was unladylike.
So it feels weird to say that you intended to show that this was the woman's battlefield in an earnest way, rather than the tragedy of how both men and women are essentialized. Women being simply mothers and vessels for heirs, and men being seen as hyper-masculine and violent. This choice also feels especially egregious, through no fault of the show its own, but something worth discussing, when juxtaposed against how many people are yelling at the House of the Dragon's contemporary show, Lord of the Rings: The Rings of Power, for being woke for having a female elf, Galadriel, being a warrior with a sword. Ranting about how a woman couldn't possibly be this powerful, despite the fact that Legolas did much the same things in Lord of the Rings. While there are certainly many criticisms to level at the Rings of Power, which has much larger and more overt structural and storytelling issues than House of the Dragon does, the source of criticism literally wielded by some is it's unrealistic that a woman in a world with elves, dwarves, and dragons would be able to fight in this way. That it's woke. Which is just stupid. Women can be kick-ass warriors, and even George R. R. Martin and Tolkien himself wrote many women as such. Yet, while it's not the House of the Dragon's writers' fault that this ultimately gender-essentializing anti-woke brigade rails against anything that they deem to go against their patriarchal and heteronormative worldview, it's telling that these same folks will often say how House of the Dragon is so much better than Lord of the Rings because the show itself mirrors their own desire about a woman's place within this world. A place that reinforcing that a woman's place is in the bedroom underscores, not challenges. Yet these tensions with how to empathize with women also go further into the writing of these women and how we're supposed to understand their interior lives throughout House of the Dragon, and how it fails sometimes to give nuance to them. For example, in the pilot of House of the Dragon, we see Alicent and Rhaenyra as close friends, even laying upon each other and being extremely close. And many people, myself included, saw those scenes and were like, ha! Gay! There were notable moments in those first 2 episodes where there was a clear queer subtext between Alicent and Rhaenyra, both in some of the lines that they say to each other and in visual moments.
I want to fly with you on Dragonback, see the great wonders across the narrow sea and eat only cake.
I'm being serious.
I never just about cake.
You aren't worried about your position?
I like this position, it's quite comfortable.
Yet, it was subtext and interpretable, not textual, leading many in the audience to miss it.
I will not live forever. I wish to see you contented, happy even.
You think a man will do it?
I had a bunch of people in my comment sections of my reviews of those episodes over on my second channel say, oh, they aren't gay, you're just reading into it because you're gay yourself. You're just trying to put yourself into the story where you don't belong. And to be fair, it's understandable why they might have this interpretation, because the show didn't make this queer subtext into text. And that's a problem with many queer readings of numerous pieces of media. Many queer people will read ourselves into media because there's clear tension between characters without it actually ever becoming text, oftentimes stemming from the fact that the writers or actors on the show didn't intend it as such. I mean, Kirk and Spock, anyone?
Something wrong? A kink in my back. That's it. No, a little higher, please. Push hard. Take it in there, Mr. Thank you, Yeoman. That's sufficient.
While we can interpret this because, again, characters' interior lives aren't stated on film as they are in books or things like that, the fact that it's not verbally or physically made 100% clear in the show's text means that we ultimately don't know for sure what these characters' sexuality is. However, what sets The House of the Dragon apart from other shows where queer people read ourselves into these stories is that this queerness was actually intentional, but not intentional by the writers. In separate interviews, these actors who played young Rhaenyra and Alicent discussed how they intentionally played the queer subtext of their characters in ways appropriate for their characters' ages, but yet how this choice was not something that was intended by the writers.
It's something that we talked about a lot. I mean, as a queer woman, I certainly read certain queer undertones that I don't know whether Ryan Condal was thinking about when he wrote it, but you know, I picked up on it. Cool. I think the friends you have as a young girl, especially at 14, of an age, your girl bestie, your best friend is like a girlfriend. You want to spend all of your time with that person. You think you're going to be best friends forever. There's this tactile closeness where you're very touchy-feely, especially as women. You know, we're allowed to change in front of each other, and we hug and we kiss and we hold in ways that boys, I guess, don't, which we need to change, by the way. It's not a stereotype that I enjoy, but unfortunately it does exist. But there's just this pure closeness where it does toe the line between platonic and romantic, because I think at 14 you don't really know what platonic and romantic is, what the words mean, let alone what the feelings mean. And so we definitely talked about it, and we definitely tried to play that in as well, so I'm glad that it read.
They're young women and their relationship is so interesting because I think that young women especially have a certain type of fondness of each other that happens when you're about like 12 to 15, 16.
Yeah.
You develop this like really beautiful, close relationship. And because of your lack of experience with love, lust, and heartbreak, you inflate all of those feelings with one another. So they can't really dictate what is platonic and what is romantic. And I think that bleeds into the relationships they have with men when they're older.
It makes sense that these actors would find this queer subtext. Not only is it a layered choice to play as an actor, Alicent's actor, Emily Carey, herself is queer. And the adult actor for Rhaenyra, Emily D'Arcy, introduced in episode 6, is also non-binary. So it's quite obvious that these queer actors would probably find this queer subtext within their characters. Yet, the writers did not intend this subtext when they wrote it, which reads to me as an interesting tension. A tension between how the writers are writing these characters versus how the actors are playing them, finding more layers to these characters that we as an audience can find, but isn't necessarily textual or intended by the people creating the show at the highest level. Yet this also showcases to me that there are moments that these writers are missing when it comes to adding layers and nuance to these two women's relationships, in a way that they perhaps would be thinking about with male characters like Daemon or Cole, who are given many more explicit textual scenes in the scripts that highlight these internal struggles or issues. These internal struggles that the actors find for the women aren't being textually given as often to these women. Their acting choices do add nuance to later scenes, like where Alicent questions Rhaenyra about sleeping with Daemon, which Rhaenyra lies about. Textually, Alicent is upset at these allegations because of the fact that it might have some implications for Rhaenyra, and also the fact that Rhaenyra may be lying to her. But it adds even deeper depth if we look at the scene through a queer subtext given by the actors, as it adds a layer of potentially Alicent feeling jealous of not being able to consummate her feelings with Rhaenyra because it would have been forbidden.
Daemon never touched me. I swear this to you, upon the memory of my mother.
It was foolish of you to place yourself in a position where your virtue could even come into question.
But again, this is only intended by the actors, not the writers. Now again, this isn't to say that the show never articulates a woman's point of view well. The opening of episode 6, for example, with its long take of Rhaenyra giving birth, is fantastic, as it takes us through all the emotions the actor has as they show their pain, their joy at the baby's birth, and Rhaenyra's anger at having to bring the baby before the queen mere moments after he's born.
I'll take him myself.
You should remain a bed princess.
Yes, I should. Help me dress.
Now, it's telling that this long take happens when there's literally no other male characters in the room to cut to, and that it's also the first scene when the show jumps to a new actor playing Rhaenyra in a time jump, so the scene that has us empathize with her is also required to help viewers ease into the time transition with this new actor as a practical concern. But it's still a great scene that lets us into Rhaenyra's headspace. And so I don't wish to argue that the show never allows us into a woman's perspective, but that it fails at times and in critical moments to do so, as well as in how the show is sometimes conceived in writing at the script level. Because you see, despite being friends, Alicent and Rhaenyra are eventually placed at odds with each other politically through no fault of their own, but through the political intentions and machinations of both of their fathers. Yet the show leans into Alicent going into full-on war mode and anger and hatred at Rhaenyra, both in her acting and the visual language of the show. Let's just say a girl knows how to wear a dress at a party. Now, this storyline, at first glance, makes a lot of sense, both in terms of it being an adaptation of the book, so they kind of had to do it, but also in terms of how women are often told to face off against each other for the limited spots given to women in higher roles in patriarchal societies. Because so few women reach places of power within these societies, women often feel like they need to fight each other rather than realizing that they should be allies working to make more places for all women, not just fighting over scraps. But that's the trick that these societies play, pitting women against each other, and that's honestly a great storyline for this show to display. Yet, again here, I think there's a lot of nuance lost in this moment, because in an interview, the show's writers spoke about how they viewed Alicent as equivalent to a Trump supporter, and Rhaenyra being, punk rock?
We said, what if Alicent is like Women for Trump and Rhaenyra's like punk rock? If you really focused in on the patriarchy's perception of women and the fact that they'd rather destroy themselves than see women on the throne, that wasn't a perspective I've ever been told before. I think it made this show feel more contemporary too.
That framing of Alicent and Rhaenyra as punk rock and Trump supporter, which is a wild dichotomy to have, feels overly reductive and super binary as a way to discuss this conflict between two women. Instead of talking about the nuances of women fighting women, the writers seem to be conceptualizing it more as a political binary antagonistic battle. A direct antagonistic political one rather than a more nuanced social and societal one that has political ramifications. And like, I get it, Trump bad, we all like to say it, but I'm just constantly disappointed in so many writers just falling into this idea of like, well, we need to like have a Trump figure. I think there's nuanced ways to do that. See my boys video to discuss that. But ultimately, it just tends to become reductive, saying like, we're gonna make this person a complete and utter asshole, and then we're gonna have our other character who we're gonna frame as complicated yet good overall. And it makes it just feel, again, reductive is the only word I can really use for it. There's so much more nuance in discussing how women are put against each other in our society, even in left-leaning spaces, for example, like Hollywood itself. There are so many women writers and filmmakers and actors who often face much more discrimination or sexual abuse or uphill battles in being able to have their voices heard in Hollywood. And as a result, many women feel that they need to fight each other for these small places in writers' rooms or getting to direct movies, or even staying silent about abuses that they faced in order to feel like they can be seen as worthy of getting a spot in those places, instead of realizing that many women should work together to raise each other up, and that we are stronger when we fight back against these things, when we face these issues as sort of a group. And how even when we face these things as a coalition, we still have other issues to discuss and all other things that we need to face, and still a strong and long battle ahead of us. But House of the Dragon just places it as like Trump supporter versus punk rock.
It basically had the outline for Rhaenyra, but it didn't specify who she was or what her relationship was like in the world. It was just like fantasy. She's a princess. She's a punk. They loved using the term punk princess, which me and Emma were a bit like, what does that mean? We're like, what does that mean?
I mean, in episode 6, after the time jump, we are reintroduced to these characters in adulthood, where Rhaenyra, for example, is forced immediately upon childbirth to walk all the way up to Alicent's room under Alicent's orders, just so that Alicent can see if Rhaenyra's child looks like her supposed father, as Alicent suspects, correctly, that Rhaenyra is sleeping with another man, as her husband is gay. And that implication that Rhaenyra is sleeping around and mothering bastards would have huge political ramifications for the realm. But this scene, and many others throughout the episode, paint Alicent is like just a kind of colossal bitch, if we're just gonna use the phrase.
Selena, sooner or later you may get one who looks like you.
Removing a lot of the nuanced portrayal and conflict that could have come out of what the younger actors had leaned into with their queer subtext reading. Alicent throughout the episode like grabs her child who is masturbating out the window and like yells at him that Rhaenyra is possibly going to kill you, and just seems like kind of frantic about it, and almost in some ways somewhat manic.
You are the challenge! You are the challenge, Aegon! Simply by living and breathing!
In a way that, like, I could understand her fear, but it's so heightened and so vitriolic that it ultimately just, like, places this sort of idea that women are gonna fight women and are against each other, and oh, look, we're gonna sort of, like, enjoy reveling in that depiction, without talking about maybe the more conflicted feelings that these two characters might have for each other stemming out of their childhood friendship. There are moments where I do think the show gives a somewhat nuanced portrayal of marginalized relationships, like between Rhaenyra and her husband Lenore. In that same episode, Rhaenyra has a really nuanced discussion with Lenore about how she doesn't begrudge him going out to war or not being home and sleeping with other men, as that was their arrangement that they were kind of agreed to when they were both forced into this marriage against their wills. But she does state that she is frustrated that he is unwilling to keep up his appearances as a father, as he knows that the kids aren't his, but how that leaves them both open to rumors of the children's parentage that exposes both of them to danger. And I like that this conversation is frank and showcases how they both understand each other but don't always see eye to eye, and there's a lot of like nuance to that there. It's messy, and I like that, but it's only one scene, and it's also a scene where we have no straight or white men in the room to contend with empathizing with. Yet when we go back to Rhaenyra and Alicent, it's just like, look at them at each other's throats, we're gonna kill each other. And that's the problem with our two lead women of the show. And I think overall, those two women are given a lot more than other women in the series, because the series still uses women outside of Alicent and Rhaenyra as props in men's stories with no real... There's some nuance to it, but not as much as I would hope or want from a series about this sort of thing. For example, in that same episode 6, we see that Daemon has married Laena Velaryon in the time jump. And in this story, Laena ultimately cannot give birth to her child, leading Daemon to have to face the same choice about a possible C-section that would kill her that his brother Viserys met with in the pilot.
But I cannot say for a surety whether it lives. Or the mother survive it? No.
Lena chooses to kill herself by dragonfire because she's a boss like that, rather than having Daemon make the choice for her, sort of denying this man's choice in her bodily autonomy. And as a result, Lena has more agency here, yet this storyline still ends in her death, and seems to have been mainly done to make Daemon face the poetic justice of having to face the same choice that his brother had made all those years ago in the pilot. While Lena is slightly more independent, she's still a storytelling tool used mainly in 2 episodes for the storylines of other men, rather than as a character unto herself. And again, the scene where she dies is well done, but that's it. She's dead in episode 6. And it's still a death that is coded as like something inherent in her womanhood that a man wouldn't have to face, that she's like choosing to deny the womanness in her body by going out by dragonfire, as opposed to dying in a way that only a woman would. Another point that underscores everything that I'm arguing here is to compare the show's choices compared to how certain characters appear in the book that this series is based upon. In Fire and Blood, many of the women and queer characters actually have much more agency or full lives outside of how they are oppressed. For example, Viserys' wife in her C-section is actually given a bit of a choice in whether she has the procedure, something Viserys chooses for her in the show. Rhaenyra also comes and chews Viserys out in the book for his wife's death, giving her a much more active voice and full awareness in critiquing the system and her father that forced her mother to continually give birth until she died, a voice that Rhaenyra is robbed of in the show.
"Her blood is on your hands," she raged at him. "Her blood is on your cock. May you die screaming." Rhaegar Baratheon was outraged by her accusations. "What are you saying, woman? This is the will of the gods. The stranger comes for all of us. How could it be my doing? What did I do? You put your cock in her. She gave you one son. That should have been enough. Save my wife, you should have said. But what are wives to men like you?" Rhaena reached out and grabbed his beard and pulled his face to hers. "Hear this, my lord. Do not think to wed again. Take care of the whelps my mother gave you, my half-brother and half-sister. See that they want for nothing. Do that, and I will let you be. If I should hear even a whisper of your taking some other poor maid to wife, I will make another Harrenhal of Storm's End, with you and her inside it."
The Knight of Flowers dies in the book much later than he does in the show, and in a tournament, where he gets to die much more of a hero's death, rather than the ignominious one he suffers in the show. Alicent too is shown to be more than just a mother only concerned with protecting her children from the evil Rhaenyra, by also having more of her own political ambitions separate from her motherhood. These are all active changes to these characters and events that the showrunners made for the series, and it highlights to me that the writers are choosing to take away agency from many of the women and LGBTQ folks in the show. It's an active choice to make these changes. While I don't assume that they're doing this maliciously, I think there is a creative reason that they're making these changes, and I think it's because they really wish to underscore the victimhood of these characters in this hyper-patriarchal world. Yet, by doing so, it removes a lot of the nuance around these characters. It allows the series to only look upon LGBTQ folks and women with pity, which reinforces this idea that we are in need of protecting, or that we are incapable of effectively fighting back or even understanding our own marginalization. Yet, in our real world, and in the book itself, LGBTQ folks and women throughout history, as well as many other marginalized folks, were not passive in allowing our subjugation, but continually fought back in numerous ways, big and small. Beyond that, we also managed to live full lives even within oppressive systems, either by forming underground communities or living out in the open closeted, or finding ways to make living in these systems tolerable. We may not have been thriving, but we are also not just merely surviving. There were many that suffered and died under these systems, most certainly, but for the House of the Dragon to choose to frame women as mostly passive victims rather than vocal agents, the series is ultimately seeing us with pity rather than with strength, and reinforces how the series continually objectifies us. This also mirrors how much of Game of Thrones itself treated women, often being needlessly cruel towards women. Like, dear God, the shit that Sansa had to deal with from both Joffrey Baratheon and Ramsay. And it showcased how much Game of Thrones wanted to use women as victims and objects in order to showcase and highlight the male villain's cruelty. And I think it's ultimately just really complicated, right? Because I'm not here saying that this is like the worst show ever in depicting women. That's, I think, would be rather stupid of me to say. But I do as a result of all of these things that I'm kind of articulating, have concerns that the House of the Dragon hasn't really wrestled with the same problems of its predecessor in Game of Thrones in its final season and finale. That in many ways is actually symbolized by that show's treatment of its central female character, Dany Targaryen. Dany Targaryen was a complex, nuanced female character throughout the show, often dealing with some of the same issues and pressures as Rhaenyra does in House of the Dragon. Dany was seen as a political prop by her brother in the first season, and also even her husband, Drogo, who I really love and is played by my man, still worships her through her ability to have children and her ability to give him the destined son that he expects her to give him.
You are a horse lord slut, and now you've woken the dragon.
I am a Khaleesi of the Dothraki. I am the wife of the great Khal, and I carry his son inside me. The next time you raise a hand to me will be the last time you have hands.
Yet, after being given power in this series, both through the dragons and the Dothraki that she sort of takes control of, Dany fights to free enslaved people and lead armies to regain the Iron Throne. And she has this sort of repeated mantra of like she wants to break the wheel. She wants to break this system that has both subjugated her and the people that she's ultimately freeing and drawing into this coalition that she's going to use to fight back against the Westerosi society that scorned her both as a Targaryen and as a woman.
Elai astropotistan. Astropot dohetrossa, si rinyo ingati orzi. Dairi. Hembar yonkai hotistan. Yonkai dohetrossa, si rinyo ingati orzi. Dairi. Sesir merinot mastan. Jevi klenunti siksondaor. Jevi klenuntis gemo pactot issa. Jevi klenuntis gemo rigna laodisis osenis. Jevi klenuntis gemo sit meri belma se boteri, se udrasmiasi. Udrasmi machan daor. Iedereen machan. Jevi klenuntito porjo gurutari machan.
Yet, in the show's final season, it tosses away all of that nuance about Dany to just go, oh, she pulled the murder spree, went crazy and did a fascism. Guess she needs to be killed now. Now, this isn't to say that this fall into fascism wasn't a justifiable arc for her character. There are many moments throughout the series where it's clear that Dany is often doing things more to build up her own power and authority over others. She often uses her victimization as a woman and a member of a disposed royal family to justify this seizing of power.
I've been shamed and betrayed, raped and defiled. Do you know what kept me standing through all those years in exile? Faith. Not in any gods. Not in myths and legends. In myself. In Daenerys Targaryen.
The world hadn't seen a dragon in centuries until my children were born. The Dothraki hadn't crossed the sea. Any sea. They did for me. I was born to rule the Seven Kingdoms. And I will.
And we as the audience end up being okay with a lot of her violent, self-indulgent tendencies because she does have some level of a moral compass and often makes the targets of her violence slavers, power abusers, and rapists who we could say in some ways deserves this violence, at least in the more punitive, violent world that is Game of Thrones. I mean, it's important to note that Dany spends most of the series off in Essos and not Westeros, where a lot of the characters that we actually give a shit about are. So when she does come to Westeros, Dany still upholds her self-interest and claim to the throne over others, which we see now that she's placed against characters that we actually like is a more authoritarian leaning that still rings true to her character, but also makes us understand her in a more gray way than the sort of black black and white binary from before. And this storyline also points out issues with something like the white savior narrative that Dany leans into, pointing out how Dany, as a white-appearing woman, is someone who does save people, but is in many ways more motivated by her own aggrandizement and her own lust for power, rather than actually building a coalition with those around her to break the wheel, as she so often said, but never actually carried out.
They're all just spokes on a wheel. This one's on top, then that one's on top, and on it spins, crushing those on the ground.
It's a beautiful dream. Stopping the wheel. You're not the first person who's ever dreamt it.
I'm not going to stop the wheel. I'm going to break the wheel.
I mean, at the end of the series, her goal was to reign over Westeros on the Iron Throne again. Not really breaking the wheel, but continuing it as it is. Yet, the show leaps over so many steps in this arc incredibly quickly, saying, oh, she just saw the tower where her family lived and went all genocidal.
I don't think she decided ahead of time that she was going to do what she did. And then she sees the Red Keep, which is to her the home that her family built when they first came over to this country 300 years ago. It's in that moment on the walls of King's Landing when she's looking at that symbol of everything that was taken from her, when she makes the decision to make this personal.
The show tried to shove what should have been episodes of character development into a single shot, and it failed. And in the end, the show vilified a woman with weak characterization, and arguably did so with two women, considering Cersei was also a woman on the Iron Throne, though she was a much more delineatedly problematic character. But it ultimately vilifies both of these characters and saying that these women were ultimately self-interested and dictators, and then does all that in service of upholding Bran, of all people, as the one that should be sitting on the throne, saying that he was the least self-centered and least there for his own personal aggrandizement, and thus deserving of power.
I know you don't care about power. But I ask you now, if we choose you, will you wear the crown? Will you lead the Seven Kingdoms to the best of your abilities from this day until your last day?
Why do you think I came all this way?
But what this ends up meaning is that the show itself maintains an authoritarian patriarchal system that was itself the problem in the first place. It ultimately individualizes the issue in saying it's a problem of these two women, and codes those individual failings as feminine, instead of then recognizing that the systemic harm that is being caused by this patriarchal and authoritarian society that needed to be subverted, the wheel that actually needed to be broken. The series doesn't end on that really important theme. It just says, well, now we got a good king, not a bad king or queen. It's ultimately reinforcing the same system instead of actually stopping it, despite the fact that it was good at articulating problems with that system. And for sure, there is some nuance in the sense that the Lords of Westeros will now choose a king every time a king dies, but that still upholds power within the upper-class aristocracy. So it's pretty galling for Tyrion to tell a former slave that this was the wheel that was supposed to be broken.
From now on, rulers will not be born. They will be chosen. On this spot are the lords and ladies of Westeros. That is the wheel our queen wanted to break.
And this brings us back to House of the Dragon, which in many ways is doing better at articulating the systemic problems, yet it's still not reckoning with how it frames individual women within the system and doesn't really empathize with their place within it, and why it leads them to the choices that they are forced to make. The show itself opens with a line saying that this is 200 years before Dany Targaryen, and even highlights that a Targaryen must be on the throne to stop the Endless Winter, alluding to the events of Game of Thrones, and it tries to make us as an audience feel that Dany's story as a woman was ultimately one of success for women, saying that while we're showing how women are harmed here like Rhaenyra, we do have a woman that will eventually win the day and be like a triumph for women, when that's not actually what happens when we see with Game of Thrones. And it's sort of like this erasing of that really important like history with Game of Thrones when it comes to depicting women. And as a result of House of the Dragon failing at this aspect, I think it allows people watching the series, just as Game of Thrones did before it, to continue to individualize systemic problems rather than really reckoning with how this system really harms everyone. I mean, you can even see this in how people react to the show. I mean, I saw some people, for example, after I did my review of episode 6 of the series, say that the rumors spread about Rhaenyra, about her as a woman sleeping with another man, was her fault. All of this is just her own chickens coming home to roost, and sort of like putting it all upon her as like an individual problem. Is like if she had just fucked the man she was supposed to fuck and been the nice, good little wife, she wouldn't be having these problems. And to a degree, yes, it is her choice to have done that, but did she really have any other? She was forced into a marriage with a gay man and expected to make heirs, and expected to play out this role of perfect lady, rather than getting to live her own life and make her own choices. She wasn't allowed to have sort of sexual freedom and sexual liberation. She did a lot of the best that she could, and both her husband and the man she had children with were both aware and accepting of the terms of this arrangement. It's not like she was trying to pull the wool over anyone's eyes, at least in an individual way, around the people around her. She could have done her perfect duty, but that was also a form of harm to her if she had lived that way perfectly. She is a super messy woman, but not a bad person. But she lives in a world that doesn't allow her to be messy in the same way men are allowed to be. But the show kind of skips over like discussing that nuance in a lot of ways, and thus allows people watching the show to like understand that that's being depicted, but then ultimately blame her for it, saying she kind of deserves it because she's reaping what she's sowing. Yeah, at the same time, these people are hypercritical of Rhaenyra, but they will work to excuse Cole's actions. Like, I literally saw the same commenter who complained about Rhaenyra say Cole was harmed, and thus it was not okay that he killed a bad man, but that it was, like, understandable, and that he shouldn't be, like, he shouldn't have to ruin the rest of his life for having that one murder on his conscience, because it was really kind of not fully his fault. It was kind of Rhaenyra's. And if that doesn't, like, ring alarm bells in your mind of how that, like, echoes very real-life stuff, that's a problem. And also the fact that the show like skips over Cole having to like face any consequences of that action by like making it happen in the like 10-year time jump. It sort of means that the show doesn't really care about Cole's facing any sort of consequences or depicting any of that. It's just sort of like, we're really focused on how he like felt bad about this situation and how it leads him to maybe be an asshole in the future, but like we really should like empathize with him without there any being like sort of like critique of the system that allows him to get away with having done such a thing. Like, we could have done a whole episode, like, really focusing in on that and been like, well, look, the system let him off the hook because they didn't want to ruin his life for having killed a gay man. And that would have been a horrible thing for this world to have done, sort of like devaluing a gay man's death, but it would have been an honest thing to depict for this world. And yet we just sort of skip over it. And thus it allows the audience to kind of like side with Cole, or at least feel understandable with Cole, and then judge Rhaenyra. And then it comes down to a lot of how these shows frames these characters in these situations. Like I mentioned with my discussion of Galadriel and Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, it feels as if House of the Dragon ultimately underscores preconceptions about a patriarchal society, depicting it, and while certainly not endorsing it, not always doing enough to make its criticism centralized enough around those who are already benefiting from the system. It's not challenging those people enough and challenging us watching the show enough into like sort of reckoning with these problems. I mean, we can see this really clearly in how people are talking about House of the Dragons as a show. There's been a lot of discourse online with people saying like, oh, we can't invest in the show because there's no clear good guy. Everyone is awful, so we don't know who to cheer for and who we should ultimately want to sit on the Iron Throne at the end of the series. But that criticism misses the entire point of what I think the series is trying to say, that the whole system of people fighting over the Iron Throne inherently will morally compromise everyone, because at some point they will have to choose self-interest over the good of others if they wish to have power. That's what societies that value power and create hierarchies based on certain qualifiers, be it class, race, gender, blood lineage, whatever you wish to choose, will ultimately lead people to do, to choose between themselves and others. It doesn't build up a community mindset, but one that just constantly venerates power rather than helping others. The idea that an unselfish and just ruler like Bran will come along is inherently a myth, something that George R.R. Martin himself intended to deconstruct with Game of Thrones, challenging the perfect grand heroes and monarchs of J.R.R. Tolkien's writing in Lord of the Rings, that itself was based on centuries-old oral tales of grand heroes and kings. Martin's argument was that the real fantasy of things like Tolkien wasn't the dragons or orcs, but that these systems can function without inherent harm to others and ourselves. In an ideal world, in something beyond a system that values power, Rhaenyra would have been allowed to just be a messy woman, but since she is placed in this world where she is supposed to value power over all others, and yet is placed lower on a socially constructed hierarchy as a woman, she ultimately has to continually compromise her own desires and push herself over others, and places herself at odds with those who she would otherwise get to care about, like Alicent. That's the point of House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones, and it's why when the show fails to show the nuance of things like Rhaenyra and Alicent long-distance relationship, just making them binary antagonists, misses critiquing the actual harm the system causes, instead making it a show about who gets to sit on the Iron Throne and individualizing these issues, rather than a show about how the Iron Throne itself is a piece of shit. And it's why it was frustrating that Game of Thrones itself got so close to this idea of destroying the Iron Throne, but missed the same point by just putting Bran on the throne by not actually changing the system, not ending the game. It's these same misunderstandings of how systems that aggrandize power, keep people down and fighting each other in our real world lead to people getting angry when some folks criticize someone like the recently deceased Queen Elizabeth, even going so far as to throw some people in jail like some folks have been in the UK for speaking out against the monarchy. Because some people see it as protecting individual people that we have come to culturally, parasocially like, such as Queen Elizabeth, rather than how it's people pointing out the long history of colonialization that the monarchy was built upon, the crimes they still get away with, and the costs they still are to the taxpayers in the UK. Not to mention the cult of personality and love of authority that we see with other political figures around the world, such as in the United States, Russia, Brazil, and many other places. And it's why talking about House of the Dragon being about who gets to sit on the Iron Throne is missing the point of the series as a whole. And this misinterpretation of the show, I think, is in part due to the problems of the showrunners themselves not doing a good job of letting all other voices into it, but instead just individualizing their own. It's even more frustrating to show this lack of self-awareness on the part of franchises like Game of Thrones when you could look at other potentially female-driven fantasy series that are out there that actually have done this work. I mean, why haven't we got a series based on the works of N.K. Jemisin or Octavia Butler or Ursula K. Le Guin of the same magnitude as things like House of the Dragon or Lord of the Rings or The Witcher or the upcoming Brandon Sanderson project, all projects made by male writers? I mean, this is work that Ursula K. Le Guin herself did decades ago. If you look at her Earthsea series of books, she initially wrote that series as a patriarchy, with only men being able to have magical powers in that world. But then after realizing that she had made that mistake in her writing, in her fourth book, she really dug down deep and analyzed why this was a problem within the world.
In the Tombs of Atuan, you've got a female central character, and yes, she certainly doesn't emerge as a liberated woman.
No, the Earthsea books as feminist literature are a total, complete bust from my own archetypes and from my own cultural upbringing. I couldn't go down deep and come up with a woman wizard. Maybe I'll learn to eventually, but when I wrote those, I couldn't do it. I wish I could have.
I mean, if you haven't read it, go read Tahanu, because it is a book about a woman living in a fantasy world where only men are allowed to have power. But Ursula K. Le Guin was only able to write that book after self-analyzing the issues that she had made implicitly within the first 3 books of the Earthsea series, where she accidentally, unintentionally upheld a patriarchal system without realizing it.
What I'd been doing as a writer was being a woman pretending to think like a man. I had to think, now why have I put men at the center of the books almost entirely? And the women are either marginal or in some way essentially dependent on the men. I started to write the 4th book in the series, Tahanu.
This is something done back in the 1990s by female writers, but it's something we're continually not seeing done by TV shows themselves these days, despite those TV shows themselves explicitly being about doing that work. And as a result, a lot of young men watching the show, like my brother, will recognize themselves in the story, like through Cole, and feel like, oh, someone understands me in my pain, which is great. I want my brother to be able to see himself in the show. But it means that he's not really feeling challenged in understanding how others may suffer because of the actions of Cole, and thus makes it capable for men to blame others like Rhaenyra for not rising up through the shit like the men can. Like Dany's story in Game of Thrones did, it individualizes a systemic problem and codes it as a personal failing of women and other marginalized people, rather than a systemic wheel that does in fact need breaking. At the end of the day, House of the Dragons is not a bad show. It's undoubtedly much more complex and well done than many shows out right now. In fact, it's one of my favorite shows that I'm currently watching. And that's actually why I put a lot of effort to critique the show in such a nuanced way. Because hey, We can all like imperfect art, and we don't have to essentialize everything as we love it or we hate it. Videos like this, where I'm trying to have a nuanced critique and discussion, is really important to me. So please, for the love of God, in the comments don't say, Jesse, you hate the show or you hate men. I mean, please disagree with me. If you think I've reached or I got something wrong in this review, I want to have that discussion. Like, I'm here for that. But I just don't want it to be like, Jesse hates the show or Jesse wants the show to say men bad. My critiques of House of the Dragon, and I say critiques and not hatred or dislike, comes from the show's lack of willingness to do something new at times, to challenge the world it's set in and thus our world that it's made by. House of the Dragons was never going to be the show where I can see the world beyond a patriarchy. While many fantasies can allow us to do that, Westeros never can. Yet, House of the Dragons does wish to directly engage with that society, yet it fails to show us a unique perspective within it, to say something different with this show that ultimately wasn't already said in Game of Thrones or in the dozens of other fantasy and male-centric media that we've gotten over the past few years. It may be that certain verses of the song that House of the Dragon is playing is slightly louder and clearer than Game of Thrones, but it's still just playing the same theme song. Alrighty, everybody, thank you so much for indulging me this overly long video. I'm at this point, I'm just like rolling with it. My videos are long. I like to talk about a lot of things. Hopefully you're here for it. We'll see how this does in the algorithm, but I just like talking a lot about media that I love and find interesting, and I kind of needed to make something really long and indulgent, given the fact that I've been dealing with a lot of like terrible shit in my videos recently, like the Matt Walsh stuff. So thank you for indulging me, and I hope this video was like fun and had really good discussions, and I offered up to you to hear more of that. Speaking on that though, I know a lot of you are wondering, well, why is this video out and not your Matt Walsh video that you keep talking about, the What is a Woman Part 2 video? That will be coming. Again, I apologize, it is a very big video, and I mean not just in terms of length. I'm doing a lot of stuff for it, and also Matt Walsh just keeps on doing things that I need to talk about, and it's a problem, and so I just have to keep adding to the video because I kind of want it to be my definitive, like, I'm done talking about this issue. But that video will be coming soon. The intention is that I hope that video is going to come out a week or so after this video comes out, and that it actually is going to go up for my patrons just a few days from now, if not already being up by the time you see this. So patrons should have access to the video soon. It should be up in just a week or so for other people. Please stick with me. I'm very proud of that video, but it's also just a really difficult video to get into, so I just kind of like need to do fun videos like this. Oh, also before I forget, this video I should say is like kind of a subtle collaboration between myself and the wonderful Princess Weeks. We didn't necessarily like collaborate on sort of coming up with our own videos, but we did have a lot of discussions about this show. And she also helped give notes on this script. So please, if you like this video, go and watch Princess Week's own video about the show, because I think she does a really good job also talking about House of the Dragon. And I think her video is really, really great and give added perspective that I don't have on this show. So please go support Princess Weeks. She's freaking awesome. And if you want more House of the Dragon discussion, she's got that for you. Beyond all of that, thank you so much for watching this. I hope you all live long and prosper, everybody. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget I have a Patreon where you can get videos early, like I just said. I'm on Nebula, other things like that. And I look forward to the next episode of House of the Dragon. Alrighty, the videos I've had to do this month are really crappy and difficult, so I'm very glad that I'm going to be able to do something kind of fun right now, and thank all of my patrons who allow me to be able to pay my bills, who help support me doing what I do. I love all of you. I thank all of you. I could not do this without you. Thank you so much for everything that you give me and the life that you let me lead. It is deeply appreciated. And with that said, an extra special thank you to Catherine Lynn Beth, Joe Herman Holt, Karen Allen Foss, Alizia Titivia, Miranda Janelle, Lily Gray, Ashley Allen Bokikio, Jason Nublar, Morgan the Pirate Queen, Stephen Kleinard, Ali Gobert, Jam Shin, Mary Mello, Super Dazzy, Matt Chung, Randy Thompson, Wellington Marcus, Auntie Kate 808, Boyd and Mary Beth, Earl, D. Kessere, Vincent Ellington, Baba Ruski, Felicia Toast, Joseph Dewey, Chloe Dollar, Elizabeth Christensen, James Krivda, Dominic Noble, Jennifer Fuss, Nitch, hopefully I'm saying that right, Andy with an I, Jessica Wright, Sean McKenzie, Lily Hazel Eyes, Nathaniel Fraughton, Sonia Nero-Perdeau, Eric Knatz, Alice Stice, Farangato, Mag, Transit Toronto, Wen, Dizzle Bizzle, Shasha M, Spencer Brownlee, Melinda Walters, Stephen Richardson, W, Randy Edie, Shield Maiden, 4444, awkward pause, Tangy Wilson, Mark the Edge, Pissed into a City Garage, Carrie the Neuroturtle, Cyber Quaker, Drew Batch, Beatrix Purvis, Fox E, Ulysses the Pagan, Willow B, Kevin Freitag, Spooky Heather, Sylvia, Sean Piper, Epsilon is greater than, Lysa, Martin J. Lowar, Jedi Indiana Jones, Silly Christie, Ajas Odd, Flynn, Sarah Leslie Hutchkins, Gretchen Badger, Jordan Sabers, Sarah Lemero, Patricia Cromshin, Meadow Whisperer, William Stewart, Sky Skinner, Becky Sparks, Blueberry Hill, Sarah Bystem, Zamula Kincaid, Keelis, Jason Knott, Justine, Nathan Steele, Laura Demereau, Verdict Sky, Leo the Boyd, Troy Stahl, Hia Reeses, Melody Ann Winter's Good, Jordy Lusso, Blue, Maeve, Celestial Dawn, The Tipsy Changeling, Grumpy Dragon 75, Tony the DC Nerd, Luna T, Holly Walther, Strawberry Pup Tart, Nikki Gordon Bloomfield, Geek Filter, Crit Facts, Michael Godey, Eric Bogdan, Abigail Mary, Unicorn Floof, Bella Lugosi, and James Hodge. You all rock, and I adore you and love you and thank you for everything.